We're going to talk about social media's favorite homesteading topic, probably besides chickens, which is sourdough. Today, we're going to go over sourdough starter. You know, a lot of people get really intimidated by sourdough, but it's really not that much more effort than a yeast dough. And I love sourdough, so that's why I make it. But there's also a lot of research on how it's good for your gut health. And obviously, it's cheaper to make it at home, and it's healthier than buying it at the store. So today we're going to go over how to feed your sourdough starter. If you want to make your own starter from scratch, that is awesome. I have heard a lot of stories about how it is difficult. I bought mine from another creator who I can tag below. You can also ask a friend for some of their starter. I'm sure they'd be happy to give you some. If you want to start it though, I think it's like a week or two process to start it yourself. And then you need to keep it alive by feeding it. What does that mean? Feeding it just means that you are going to continually give it a ratio of flour and water to keep it active and bubbly and robust so that you can use it for baking. This is my sourdough starter. I keep mine in the fridge. You can either keep it on the counter, and I would recommend that you feed it every day if you're going to keep it on the counter, or if you keep it in the fridge, you feed it about once a week, depending on how much food you're giving it. So this is my starter. It's not looking too great because I usually feed it on Fridays and it's Sunday currently, so it's had an extra 2 days to eat through all of that flour and water, but we're gonna fix it and it's no problem. All you need to keep your sourdough starter going is a few basic things. You need a scale, especially if you're just starting out. These are not expensive. I bought this on Amazon for like 10 bucks. You need a clean jar for your sourdough starter. I like these wide mouth jars only because they're much easier to clean than the traditional ball jars. I know people like to use the WEC jars. Those are too expensive for my taste, so these are just wide mouth jars that I like to use. You need water. You need your starter, a scale, and you need flour. I use all-purpose flour for my starter. Some people use bread flour. You can use things like rye flour. Use whatever you want. I think it's better to feed it with regular old all-purpose flour because it's cheaper than bread flour. You're going to use bread flour to bake with, but on a consistent basis, this is what I use. We've turned our scale on and we've set it to 0 grams. If you can change the unit, make sure it's set to grams. And then I'm gonna put 10 grams of sourdough starter in my clean jar. 12 is good enough. Then we're going to add a ratio of 1 to 5 to 5, which means I'm going to add 50 grams of flour. So you tare your scale, you add 50 grams of flour. Again, good enough. We're gonna add a little more because we had 12. And then you're also gonna add 50 grams of water. Then you're just going to mix it until all of the flour is combined. We're gonna do a little math lesson on ratios. Everyone gets really intimidated by the ratio, but it's really not that hard. So let's just do a couple examples to get you used to how you wanna feed your sourdough starter. If you're feeding it at a 1 to 1 to 1 ratio, this is 1 part starter, 1 part flour, and 1 part water. Starter, flour, water. Equal parts. Let's say you have 1 gram of starter. To feed your starter, you're gonna do 1 gram of flour and 1 gram of water. It's going to eat through that pretty quickly. So you're gonna have to feed it often, like every few hours if you were gonna do 1 to 1 to 1. So if you extend it, or if you multiply your ratios of flour and water, it will last longer. So you could do 1 to 2 to 2. Flour and water always are equal, your starter does not have to be equal. So let's say you did 10 grams of starter, you would just multiply your starter number by the ratio number. So 10 grams would be 20 grams of flour and 20 grams of water. If you did a 1 to 5 to 5 ratio, you would have 10 grams of starter, and then you would multiply your starter grams by your ratio, so you'd have 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. You could do whatever you want here. If you have need a huge starter for a bunch of baking, you could do 1 to 10 to 10. Or if you need it to last really long in your fridge, you could do 1 to 20 to 20. It all depends on what you're using it for and how long you need it to last, or how much starter you need for your recipe. But I just wanted to give you a little tutorial because I think people get really intimidated by the ratio, but it's really not that bad. And then in the end, you'll have a happy starter. Now that we have our mixed new sourdough starter, you are going to put the lid on. You are not going to put the ring on because these rise as they eat through the flour, and if your jar is not big enough, it will eat and then the top will come off, but it needs room to expand. Also, it releases gases and things, so if you leave the lid on and it expands too much and there's too much pressure, your jar could break. So just put the lid on, and then we're gonna put this right back in the fridge, and we're either gonna feed it again next week, or what's more than likely, we are gonna make some sourdoughs for Easter next week. Now the question is, what do you do with the leftover starter that you're not keeping in your fridge to continue your starter? This is called discard. This, a lot of people just throw it out. That's why it's called discard. You discard it. Otherwise, I save it. People do save it, and then you can bake with it. It's not going to act as an active sourdough starter, but you could still make delicious things with it, like bagels, breads, cookies, all kinds of stuff. So we're going to refill this jar also and put this jar back in the fridge. Just a final note on cleaning these jars. This stuff gets like concrete when it dries. So you do not want to be dumping this down your drain, especially consistency. You will have problems. So I would get your spatula, scrape as much as possible out of the jar. Then I usually get like paper towels and scrape off the remaining. I'll get it like a little bit more wet and then scrape it off and throw it in the trash. You don't want to be dumping jars of this down the drain. I hope this information made sourdough starting a little bit less intimidating and a little bit more accessible so that you can get into the lovely world of sourdough breads also. In the meantime, follow me for more homesteadish tips.